Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Gluten Free Chef. I'm your host, Calvin, and I'm here to answer your questions about celiac disease, gluten-free living, and gluten-free eating. To learn more information on how you too can live a simple, happy, and healthy gluten-free lifestyle, follow my food blog at theglutenfreechefblog.com or follow me on Twitter at glutenfreechef5 and like me on Facebook at the Gluten Free Chef blog by Calvin Eaton. We're also found on Stitcher, and you can also review and like this podcast over at iTunes. Let's jump right into this week's episode. Okay, let's get started. So what is celiac disease? I know, obviously, for those of you listening who are celiacs, this seems like a silly question to kind of base an entire podcast around, but I thought the same thing. But then I was doing just some internet browsing, and I actually asked the same question over on my blog, theglutenfreechefblog.com. And obviously, many of us know that May is Celiac Awareness Month. And I recently stumbled across a repost on the Celiac Disease Foundation's website, celiac.org. And it was just kind of just the basic informational post on what is celiac disease. And I thought it was appropriate to kind of share that and just kind of explore it a little bit again, because with all the rhetoric going on now about gluten-free living and gluten-free eating, and it seems to not have become very faddish and kind of the in vogue thing to do, there's so much information now on wheat-free and grain-free and autoimmune disorders and gluten intolerance and gluten sensitivity, and is gluten sensitivity the same as celiac disease, and is gluten sensitivity real? And even if someone is, tested in the biopsy done and it comes back negative, can they still be gluten sensitive or be gluten intolerant, and etc.? And it just got me thinking about the quote, and I'll quote, "The more we know, the less we understand." There's so much information to sift through and to kind of sort out. It can be hard to decipher the truth from the myth. And I've read in many different blogs and just in different conversations I've had with friends and people that I've come into contact with, that for many people who have adopted a gluten-free diet, and also in my experience with customers when I had my bakery, even sometimes for those people who proclaim to be following a gluten-free diet, it's sometimes hard or difficult for them to actually explain to a layperson what celiac disease is. And I think because it's such a convolution and ball of confusion at times, and just getting a diagnosis, even when you finally do get it, it makes it sometimes difficult to explain it to somebody who doesn't know already. And you can oftentimes, and I've had the same experience, finding yourself talking in circles, maybe misspeaking and calling it an allergy when it's not, and just really not explaining it well. And I think sometimes when that happens, and because there's so much information and rhetoric, both true and false, about celiac disease, it's sometimes been joked about and poked fun of, when in actuality it's a very serious and very hard illness to deal with. So the question, what is celiac disease, I thought that the Celiac Disease Foundation pretty much gives the most succinct answer to what that is, and I'll just go ahead and quote right from their website. So according to celiac.org, what is celiac disease? Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that can occur in genetically predisposed people where the ingestion of gluten leads to damage in the small intestine. It is estimated to affect 1 in 100 people worldwide. 2.5 million Americans are undiagnosed and are at risk for long-term health complications. So that is the most simple, clear, and succinct definition that I could find of what is celiac disease. And even with that, It's literally only about 3 sentences. What does that mean? So, in a nutshell, people who have celiac disease, when we ingest gluten, which, what is gluten? That's a whole nother question that can use up 15 or more minutes. Gluten is a protein that's typically found in grains like wheat, rye, and barley. When people who have celiac disease ingest gluten into their body mounts an immune response that's abnormal, hence is why it's considered an autoimmune disorder. And this response attacks the villi of the small intestine. The villi are the finger-like projections that kind of line our small intestine, and they damage them, they flatten them, and interfere with the way the villi ingest or absorb the nutrients that we take in from food. So essentially, when you eat gluten, your body attacks its own internal system or the organ of the small intestine. Obviously, it's a hereditary disease, and people who are predisposed to it are most liable to get it. Now, what does that all mean, and why is it so harmful? Well, the fact that your small intestine is being damaged in the way that your body is absorbing nutrients, we know that the digestion process, just scientifically speaking, the nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine into your bloodstream and are transported to the various organs and regions in the body where they're most needed. Because that is affected by this autoimmune response, the way that you absorb food and nutrients is altered, and therefore, when it's left untreated, people who have celiac disease, it leads to additional health concerns like fatigue and type 1 diabetes, and some people, they get rashes, they get anemia, osteoporosis, infertility. All of these problems, these neurological conditions, can be a result from your small intestine being damaged by gluten because your body is attacking the small intestine, and then therefore it just creates like a domino effect of other serious issues that may not necessarily make you die on the spot, but over time you can see why it's harmful to your body. And the only treatment to celiac disease is, at least for right now, strict adherence or avoiding gluten, which is that protein that's found in wheat, rye, and barley. Other grains as well, but those are the most common. So when you have celiac disease, it significantly alters the way in which you eat, what you eat, how you eat. So because we live in such a processed world, in America we eat, there's a ton of processed foods. Most processed foods contain some form of wheat, wheat flour, or rye or barley, wheat being the biggest one, such as, bread, rolls, pastries, donuts, etc., etc. And so the biggest issue that you find when you get diagnosed is that now what do I eat? Because most of us at some point, even if we do eat a predominantly whole food diet and we cook our own food, there are so many sources of hidden gluten that are not just in the most readily known foods. Like, okay, obviously I won't go buy a loaf of bread if I have celiac disease unless I know that the bread is gluten free and has been made with gluten free grains like tapioca starch, or sorghum flour or rice flour. So it really, you focus more on what you're eating because you can't have gluten in. There are obvious sources of gluten, like in the things I just mentioned, and there are hidden sources of gluten that are sometimes found in things that you won't think about, like ketchup and different condiments and sauces and syrups and dressings for salads. So it can be very difficult, and sometimes when people initially stop eating gluten, they're still having reactions, and they're not seeing any results, or they're not feeling any better. Their gut is still harmed, or their gut is still agitated because they may be ingesting gluten through their skin, through a shampoo, or through a soap, or through a lotion, or through a body wash. These are all also types of hidden sources of gluten, and as these things kind of go on and you're ingesting gluten and it's building up, you can become vitamin deficient. Like, so for me, I'm significantly vitamin D deficient, and the way that my body absorbs vitamin D, there's something wrong with that. So that leads to the fatigue. And even though I now am on a vitamin D regimen and also a B12 regimen, I still have to take supplemental sources of vitamin D and B12 because my body has been so altered in how it absorbs those nutrients from my food. So, it's an autoimmune disorder in the sense that, of course, it's your body, it's basically attacking itself. And so, in a nutshell, that is what celiac disease is, and why it's so important that adherence to a gluten-free diet is so important. And not only do you have to worry about what you're eating, but you also have to worry about the environment in which it is prepared. Now, there's a wide range of sensitivity levels with gluten or celiac disease, and some people are more sensitive to certain things than others. So, for instance, oats are naturally gluten-free as long as they're sourced and farmed, or the crop is grown on a farm that is not also closely growing wheat. Oats are naturally gluten-free, but for some people, even ingesting oats, their body, their systems are too sensitive to that, so they shy away from oats. So they wouldn't eat oatmeal or anything with oats, even if they're gluten-free oats, because their bodies are just that sensitive. Additionally, most people who have celiac disease are living with other people, family members, quite often, that may not have that illness. So now you have to start thinking about cross-contamination. Am I baking in the same pans? Am I baking my gluten-free bread with my regular bread? Are we using the same bowls, the same utensils, the same instruments to prepare our food? Because that can be ways in which you may be ingesting gluten, and even though you're trying to be gluten-free. So cross-contamination can be an issue. Eating out is a huge issue because many times now, and what the issue becomes is that many restaurants are jumping on the bandwagon and proclaiming themselves to be gluten-free and to have a gluten-free menu. Hey, we have a salad. The salad is naturally gluten-free. It only has lettuce and tomatoes and onions in it. But then you have to ask, well, how was it prepared? Are the same bowls that you use to prepare like croutons, breadcrumbs, used, rinsed off, and then you toss my supposed or alleged gluten-free salad in, and now there's maybe some matter or bits of breadcrumb in my salad. Even in just very small amounts, many people can have reactions. So that's why it becomes that much more important for people to be advocates for themselves, and to make sure that they are asking those types of questions. Are my French fries, which are naturally gluten-free, potatoes are gluten-free, are they being cooked or baked in a fryer or what have you that also bakes or fries, tater tots that contain gluten, or fish sticks, or whatever it is? So that's why it just becomes, sometimes I've heard people be called so anal or almost fanatical about it, in a sense, because each person has to almost be their own advocate at all times, because a restaurant may be doing its due diligence to be gluten-free, but sometimes when people don't have celiac disease, or they may not be very familiar with it, they may think that they're adhering to these guidelines. They may forget, oh yeah, maybe that marinade for that chicken may have soy in it, or soy sauce. Soy sauce is made from fermented wheat. That's a source of gluten. So, really understanding what celiac disease goes much beyond than just that textbook or dictionary definition. It really involves truly understanding all the factors that go into the illness and what gluten really is, because that's really the culprit. What gluten is not, and what foods have and do not have them, or what items have gluten. I know I've even learned that sometimes Play-Doh can even have gluten. Plaster, when you're talking about maybe building a house or putting up a wall, can be a source of gluten. So it can become a little scary, it can be a little daunting, but like I said, understanding all of these factors help you to, really understand what celiac disease is and why people are so, I guess, fanatical about staying away from it. So that's going to wrap up the second episode, and I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but please go on the blog and be sure to submit any questions that you might have, or maybe you want to do a part 2 of what is celiac disease to even go into more detail, or maybe what is gluten. But this will end the second podcast.